Not a warm neighborly note or a friendly holiday card. No, this was different. Cold, official, uninvited. The envelope was thin and stark white, slipped into my mailbox without ceremony. No return address, just a harsh, blocky emblem of our local HOA stamped like a scar in the upper left corner. Something about it already felt ... off. I ripped it open on instinct. At first I figured it was the usual nonsense lawn height standards. Maybe a reminder to paint your shutters beige instead of taupe, but what I found made my jaw tighten. A $250 fine. Reason: ongoing disturbance caused by excessive barking, classified as a public nuisance. I blinked, then blinked again. They were talking about Max. My Max, the overgrown lapdog with a face like a teddy bear, and the personality of a sleepy toddler. He barked maybe twice a day, once when the Amazon driver walked up, and maybe another grunt if a squirrel dared to exist within 30 feet of our lawn. He wasn't just quiet, he was lazy. This wasn't barking. This wasn't a disturbance. This was a fabricated offense, a hit job in bureaucratic ink, and suddenly, I realized something deeper. This wasn't just about a dog, it was personal. The backstory. Why? The HOA was really targeting Mary when 3 months. I had recently spoken out at a community meeting, civilly, but firmly against a sudden HOA initiative to increase monthly dues for beautification efforts that somehow only seemed to benefit the board members' own streets. I wasn't rude, I wasn't aggressive, but I was honest. And apparently, honesty had a price. It started small, anonymous complaints about my trash bins being visible from the road, even though they were behind a bush. Then I was reminded to repaint a fence that had no visible damage. Now this, a $250 fine for a dog who barked less than the HOA president's daily rants. My response: a plan fueled by spite and humor. I could have just paid the fine, let it slide, shrugged it off like most people do, but that's not me. Instead, I spent a weekend replaying every HOA meeting on YouTube. Yes, they record and archive them, and yes, they read the rules and bylaws out loud, in full at every monthly gathering. I downloaded their voices, their tones, their smug intonations, especially that of Janet, the HOA president, with a tone sharp enough to file metal. Then I got to work. You see, Max isn't just lazy. He's also shockingly trainable when bribed with the right kind of peanut butter. I hired a local dog trainer who specialized in vocal mimicry. We worked with sound cues, inflections, repetition. Within 6 weeks, Max could bark to the rhythm of the HOA's rules, not just bark sing. The big day? Max becomes a legend. I waited for the perfect moment. HOA inspection day, when board members strolled around the neighborhood with their clipboards, issuing warnings like petty tyrants with badges. As they walked past my yard, I pressed play on a small Bluetooth speaker. A recording played of Janet reciting the HOA rules, and Max, sitting beside the speaker, began howling along. Not aggressively, not chaotically, rhythmically, bark. Woof, roo, right on cue. The look on their faces? Priceless. Confusion melted into recognition. Recognition turned into offense. An offense turned into fury. They issued another notice. Disrespect toward HOA authority. I responded with a formal letter. Per your guidelines, barking is only considered a nuisance if deemed excessive or without purpose. Max is now exercising his constitutional right to expression by repeating the rules of the neighborhood. Surely you wouldn't deny a dog his civic duty. The fallout: the HOA backed off. Fast, the video of Max's performance went viral locally. A neighbor posted it to Facebook. Then it hit Reddit. By the end of the week, we were on the local news. Headline: dog trains himself to sing HOA rules after owner gets fined. I got calls from strangers, even HOA board members from other states, saying it was the funniest and most genius retaliation they'd ever seen. Under pressure from embarrassment and public mockery, my HOA quietly voided the fine. No apology, of course, but no more harassment either. Max, he got a new title: Neighborhood Spokesdog. The lesson: know the rules, then weaponize them creatively. The truth is, HOS often rely on people being passive, intimidated, quiet. But when you learn the rules better than they do, when you meet their fire with cleverness and calm retaliation, they lose control. This wasn't just about a dog anymore. It became a story of petty authority, turned on its head by creativity, discipline, and a dog who just wanted peanut butter. Till next time your HOA tries to silence you, remember Max? And let them hear you sing. Max isn't just a furry companion. He's my survivor, my healer, and my best friend. When I found Max at the local shelter, he had already been passed over by families a dozen times. A scar on his side, timid eyes, and a quiet demeanor made him unadoptable to most. But something about him clicked with me, maybe because I, too, had been through the ringer. After a brutal layoff, a breakup that left me gutted, and months of wondering if I'd ever find stability again, I brought Max home, and just like that, everything changed. He didn't bark much, he didn't need much, just a warm corner and someone to believe in him. In return, he gave me loyalty, peace, and joy I hadn't felt in years. A new home, and a seemingly peaceful neighborhood when I finally got back on my feet and bought a modest little home in a well-kept HOA neighborhood. I thought we'd found our safe haven. The streets were tree-lined. Families played on sidewalks. There was even a little community newsletter that featured potluck invitations and garage sale maps. Max fit right in. He would sit on the porch during cool evenings, tail wagging as neighbors strolled by. Kids loved him. A couple from down the road even dropped off dog treats on weekends. One woman told me Max reminded her of the golden retriever. She'd grown up with everything felt right. Until the letter came. The ambush. A fine with no warning it arrived. On a Wednesday, folded inside an official HOA envelope, the kind with no real personality. Just a cold logo at the top and text printed in strict Times New Roman. I opened it, not thinking much of it, maybe a note about lawn maintenance, or trash pickup schedules, but instead, it was a $250 fine. Reason: violation of community noise policies, persistent barking disturbance. There was no timestamp, no date of any incident, no video, no audio, no formal complaint attached, just a vague line about multiple neighborhood reports. And that's when I knew something was off. The real motive, and the HOA president who hated dogs, this wasn't coming from a random neighbor. It wasn't about noise. It was something personal. And I had a pretty strong suspicion about who was behind it. Marjorie, the HOA president with a clipboard, always glued to her hand like it was an extension of her body. Marjorie had taken a strange interest in my house from day one. Not in a helpful, welcome to the neighborhood way, but more like a hawk circling overhead. She once told me my front lawn looked unkempt the morning after a thunderstorm. Another time she left a handwritten note suggesting my mailbox paint didn't align with community aesthetic values. But most telling of all, she made a point to say, twice, that she wasn't a dog person. The second time, Max had done nothing more than wag his tail in her direction. She never liked Max, and I could tell she didn't like me much either. So this fine, it reeked of retaliation. No evidence, no due process, just HOA requested documentation. If Max had truly been a problem, surely there would be something. A decibel reading, a neighbor's complaint, a time-stamped record, even a phone video. Instead, the HOA emailed me a generic copy of the noise ordinance and said, several households have expressed discomfort with the ongoing dog-related disruption. What disruption? Max didn't bark unless someone knocked or rang the bell. Half the time he didn't even flinch when delivery drivers passed. But this wasn't about facts. This was about power. Marjorie didn't need to prove anything. She just needed to assert control and hope I would fold. But they picked the wrong dog owner. What the HOA didn't realize was that Max and I had been through worse. He survived abandonment. I survived rock bottom. And both of us had come out the other side tougher and more stubborn. I wasn't just going to roll over because some petty bureaucrat didn't like animals. I began collecting testimonies from neighbors, those who had interacted with Max, many of whom praised how calm and sweet he was. One elderly neighbor even wrote a letter saying Max helped her overcome a lifelong fear of dogs. I compiled it all, dated, signed, attached with photos of Max greeting kids on Halloween and sitting quietly on our porch. Then I delivered it directly to the HOA's office along with a formal challenge to the fine. The outcome? And the unspoken message. A week passed, then two. No follow-up, no apology, just silence. The fine quietly vanished from my record. I later found out from a board member who was secretly rooting for me that my response had caused quite a stir. Several neighbors even spoke up during the next meeting, voicing their disapproval over how Max had been targeted. Marjorie hasn't made eye contact with me since, and Max, he's still on the porch, tail wagging, loved by more people than ever. Final thoughts. When a dog is more than just a pet, Max isn't a noise violation. He's not a problem to be silenced. He's a rescue, a comfort, a living piece of proof that healing is possible, that loyalty still exists in this world. And if some HOA president thinks they can erase that with a fine, they've clearly underestimated what one dog and one determined owner can do. At first, I tried diplomacy. I really did. I wasn't looking for a fight. I didn't want drama. I just wanted someone, anyone, from the HOA to acknowledge that the fine against my dog was unfair, unfounded, and frankly, ridiculous. So I took the reasonable route. Phase 1. Silence. And Stonewallsy sent an email to the HOA's official account. Polite, respectful, even included a brief timeline. No response. I waited for days, then followed up with a phone call. The woman who answered didn't seem to care. She said I needed to talk to the enforcement officer. Transferred me. Voicemail. I left a message. Nothing. I called again the next day. This time I was told that issues like these must be handled through official channels. So I drove to the HOA's office in person. It's a little building attached to the clubhouse, with a front desk that smells like stale coffee and printer ink. The woman at the desk glanced up with mild annoyance. If you want to file a dispute, sir, you'll need to do so in writing. Our board has 30 business days to respond. 30 days. To respond to a complaint about a dog not barking excessively. The fine had been issued instantly, but getting it reversed? bureaucratic limbo. It was like yelling into a void made of smug smiles and laminated policy handbooks. Phase 2. Public embarrassment, and a throwaway line that sparked everything. I waited for the next community board meeting, which, lucky me, was only a week away. I prepared my statement, printed out copies of neighbor testimonials about Max. I even brought a USB with doorbell camera footage, showing how quiet he actually was. When my turn came to speak, I stood, introduced myself, and explained everything. Calmly, clearly I detailed the lack of evidence. I mentioned Max's quiet nature. I explained the emotional toll of being fined over something so arbitrary. And how did the board respond? They laughed. One of them, a guy named Carl, who always wore boat shoes and acted like he ran the world, leaned back and said with a smirk, "Well, if your dog insists on making noise, maybe teach him to recite the HOA rules next time." The board chuckled again. Not a single person took my concern seriously. But that line, that smug, sarcastic joke, it stuck with me. Phase 3. From frustration to inspiration. I went home fuming. I couldn't sleep that night. I kept hearing Carl's voice in my head, mocking, superior, dismissive. And then, somewhere between anger and exhaustion, an idea hit me. What if Max did quote the HOA rules? No, not literally, but close. What if I trained him, with help of course, to bark in rhythm to the HOA rulebook? What if I turned their own arrogance into a parody? Phase 4. Turning a joke into a genius. Plan. I called up a local dog behaviorist, a friend of a friend, and explained my plan. She thought I was insane at first, but then she got curious. I spent the next few weeks downloading audio clips of HOA meetings. Janet, the president, always read the rules at the beginning of each session, every section, word for word. I took those recordings, edited them into bite-sized sound bites, and played them over speakers near Max during our training sessions. We worked on sound response conditioning, reward patterns, vocal mimicry, of a sort. It wasn't about words, it was about timing, cadence, bark on the beat, pause, bark again, bark when Janet said property violations, bark again at quiet hours. It was part obedience drill, part protest performance, and Max, he nailed it. Phase 5. Showtime. One sunny Saturday morning. The board was doing their neighborhood walkthrough, clipboards out, checking trash bins, mailbox heights, fence colors. As they neared my house, I stepped onto the porch with Max, held up a speaker, and pressed play. Out came Janet's voice, clear and crisp, reading the HOA's own rules. And right beside her, timed almost perfectly, Max began to bark, not randomly, not wildly, but on cue, with just enough rhythm and consistency to be unmistakable. It sounded like he was responding to her, barking along like some obedient, rule-quoting protester. The board froze. Carl's smirk dropped. Janet squinted, confused. I smiled, waved and said, "Figured we'd follow your advice." Phase 6. The blowback. Later that week, I received a second letter from the HOA. Not a fine, a warning for inappropriate conduct during board oversight. I sent them a reply. Per your previous recommendation at the public meeting, we followed your advice and trained our dog accordingly. Max now recognizes the sound of HOA rules and responds in kind. No follow-up after that. But I did notice something interesting. At the next community meeting, Carl wasn't there, and Janet skipped the rule reading portion entirely. HOA wanted rules followed, so I taught my dog to sing them word for word, fueled by frustration, caffeine, and a level of sarcasm only petty revenge can ignite. I launched a mission. Not just any mission, a tactical protest disguised as dog training. Bex was already a smart pup. He knew all the standard tricks. Sit, speak, stay quiet. But now, we were entering a new chapter, a more advanced curriculum. I introduced him to new commands, custom-tailored to our battle with the HOA. HOA time. Sing. It'd read the rules. And somehow, Max understood the assignment. From bylaws to bark notes, the training begins every night after work. I turned my living room into a performance space. I sat with Max, rulebook in hand, and began reading. The HOA bylaws allowed. And yes, the entire rulebook, page after page of dry soul-crushing regulations, lawn height requirements, trash bin visibility restrictions, mailbox paint tones. But I had a special focus. Section 12.42 Noise violations. That was the golden section. The very clause they'd used to fine us, so I turned it into a training anthem. I wasn't just reading, I was conducting. I used text-to-speech software to transform the rulebook into mechanical, monotone audio clips. I played them aloud as Max sat, ears perked, absorbing the patterns. We repeated certain phrases dozens of times. Then, at carefully chosen pauses in the audio, Max would bark, or howl, or let out a playful growl, perfectly timed with the robotic reading of excessive noise prohibitions. It became a rhythm, a beat, a chorus of compliance that mocked every syllable of their authority. Lights, camera, canine performance, of course. I wasn't just doing this for laughs. I was documenting everything. Every training session became a filming opportunity. I mounted my phone to a tripod. I lit the room just right. I even edited clips into polished, short-form videos, complete with captions and dramatic music in the background. But one clip, one particular take became my favorite. The operatic bark heard around the neighborhood. It was late. Around 11:30 p.m., the neighborhood was silent. The only sound in my house was the soft hum of the speaker. I played one of the more absurd, self-important rules from the HOA handbook, section 12.4. To all forms of excessive, repeated, or disruptive noises, including but not limited to barking, are prohibited and may be subject to disciplinary action. The computerized voice droned on. Max sat beside the speaker like a statue, and then, as if possessed by the spirit of a Shakespearean actor, he howled. Not a normal howl. This was a full-bodied, operatic, dramatic, sustained bark, a musical crescendo that sounded like it had been rehearsed by a Broadway understudy waiting for his big moment. I was speechless. It was like he knew the subtext, obeying the rules, too well by this point. Max wasn't just barking. He was performing the policies back at the people who wrote them. It wasn't rebellion. It was obedience at its most absurd. He wasn't breaking any rules. He wasn't causing chaos. He was literally responding to the bylaws in rhythm and harmony. The irony, they couldn't touch us. Everything was by the book. Every clip I filmed was proof that Max never barked without a trigger, never howled without context, in that context the HOA's own voice, their own words, their own rules. What came next? From joke to viral justice, I compiled the best clips and edited them into a montage. 30 seconds of pure, chaotic HOA poetry. Max listening intently to the rulebook. Max howling at the word disturbance. Max barking with pinpoint comedic timing as the robotic voice droned about quiet hours. I posted it to my personal account, captioned it, HOA, find my dog for excessive barking, so now he sings their bylaws like a good boy. It took 12 hours for it to hit 100,000 views. By the next morning, it was being shared on forums, dog lover, Facebook groups, and even made it to a local news story about creative neighborhood protests. The aftermath, no more fines. Just applause. The HOA didn't send another fine. Didn't even respond. One neighbor told me that during the next board meeting, the video was briefly mentioned, followed by awkward silence. Another neighbor taped a dog biscuit to my mailbox with a note that read, "Give this to the most talented performer on the block." Max, of course, accepted it graciously. Final bark. Sometimes the best revenge is rhythmic obedience. We didn't break a single rule. We didn't yell. We didn't threaten. We just turned obedience into satire and held up a mirror so they could hear how ridiculous they sounded. Sometimes, if the system is absurd, the smartest thing you can do is play along so well they regret inviting you to the game. And now, when anyone says, HOA time, Max barks right on cue. The video that took down an entire HOA one bark at a time once. I had the footage. I knew I was sitting on something special. Hours of training sessions, perfectly timed barks, and Max's now legendary howl to section 12.4. 2. It was all there, raw and powerful. But now it needed polish. So I opened up my editing software and got to work. The edit, turning footage into firepower. I trimmed every clip, tightened the timing, and overlaid captions with the actual HOA rulebook quotes. I added dramatic zoom-ins on Max's face as he barked with comic precision, slow-mo shots when he tilted his head in response to noise ordinance, light, quirky background music to enhance the satire, violins and all. I cut between the robotic voice, reciting the HOA bylaws, and Max's perfectly timed howls, making sure the rhythm hit just right. I even inserted a legal disclaimer at the bottom of the screen. All training conducted in accordance with HOA guidelines and community standards. Because I wasn't just mocking them, I was technically following every rule they wrote. The final touch. A title that hit like a punchline. Dog fined for barking, so he learned to sing the rules. Instead I hit upload, took a deep breath, and waited. What happened next? The internet took over. The first few hours were quiet. A few views, some likes, the usual. Then, something changed. By hour 6, it had 1,000 views. By hour 12, over 20,000, and then it exploded. Within a day, the video shot past 200,000 views, then 500,000. By the end of the first week, it crossed 2 million. It was everywhere. The comments section became a war zone for the HOA. People poured into the comments, cheering Max on like he was some kind of four-legged freedom fighter. This is the greatest clapback in HOA history. Give Max an honorary law degree. This HOA deserves to be barked at in every language. The jokes were endless, but the support was real. Strangers messaged me. People from other states, even other countries, started sharing stories of their own HOA horror tales. It tapped into something bigger. HOA overreach, petty fines, abuse of power. And Max. He became the face of the movement, the viral snowball. From TikTok to television, it didn't stop at YouTube. TikTok creators clipped the video into edits with trending sounds. Pet advocacy forums shared it in threads titled "This Dog Deserves a Medal." Twitter lawyers weighed in on how perfectly we exploited the loopholes. Then the press started calling it. Local news station reached out for a feel-good feature. Then a national pet blog asked for an interview. Then a major tech site featured Max in an article called "The Dog Who Outsmarted an HOA with Bark-Timed Protest." I couldn't believe it. What started as a petty fine and a sarcastic command, "Read the rules, Max," had turned into a full-blown cultural moment. The HOA's reaction? Silent, red-faced, and exposed. You want to know what the HOA did in response? Absolutely nothing. They didn't release a statement. They didn't acknowledge the video. They didn't even deny it. Because what could they say? That a dog had outwitted their bureaucracy. That their noise ordinance had been used as a musical punchline. They were silent, but the neighborhood wasn't. Neighbors laughed in passing. One put up a yard sign that read, "Bark responsibly, Max is listening." Another gave me a thumbs up while walking her poodle and said, "Finally, someone put them in their place." Final bark, a dog, a camera, and one epic comeback. Max didn't just bark back, he barked in harmony. He barked with purpose. He turned a petty penalty into poetic justice. In a world full of bullies hiding behind policy and HOA boards built on egos and clipboards, sometimes all it takes is a well-trained dog and a viral video to expose the absurdity. We never raised our voices. We never broke a single rule. We just held up a mirror and let the world laugh with us. And now, Max still knows when it's HOA time. He still howls at the word noise. And if the HOA wants to fine us again, we'll give them a whole concert. The dog bark heard round the block, and the HOA's house of cards begins to crumble. What I didn't expect was that my fight with the HOA would open the floodgates. The viral video of Max wasn't just a funny moment, it became a spark, one that lit up a neighborhood simmering with quiet resentment and buried grievances. And then, just like that, the silence cracked. Voices start rising from the sidewalks, lawns, and poolside loungers. First email came from a neighbor 2 streets over. She said, "I saw your video. You're not alone. They made me take down my daughter's fairy lights. Said they were a safety hazard." Then came the stories. Dozens of them. A retired man was fined for hanging wind chimes that apparently made excessive noise during gusts. A single mom received a written warning because her kids were laughing too loudly at the community pool at noon on a weekend. One family had to remove a garden gnome from their flower bed because it was deemed too whimsical and distracting to passerby vehicles. It was like Max's fine had torn the bandage off something rotten. Underneath years of petty rules and power-tripping enforcement, all protected by a wall of silence, red tape, and passive compliance. But now, people were finally talking. The call for action from outrage to organizing. One neighbor, a quiet accountant who had lived here for over a decade, stepped forward and suggested we hold a community-wide meeting, not an HOA-sponsored board meeting, but our own, on neutral ground. We booked the library auditorium. Word spread through group chats, flyers, even porch-to-porch conversations. By the night of the meeting, the parking lot was overflowing. Inside, every seat was filled. The room buzzed with tension, disbelief, and the unmistakable energy of a neighborhood that had finally had enough. The questions that shook the room. People stood up one by one, no longer afraid. Why was I fined for my daughter's sidewalk? Chalk drawings. Why are we paying dues when we're constantly being punished? Who decides what's too loud, and based on what evidence? Why is there never any proof, but always a penalty? One woman held up her HOA violation letter for having an American flag windsock on her porch. She waved it like a protest banner. Another man, a military vet, calmly asked, "Are our dues going toward keeping up the neighborhood, or toward harassing dog owners and bullying families?" It was no longer about Max. It was about the culture of fear the HOA had built, where nuisance citations replaced community values, and subjective rules ruled over common sense. The cracks appear, and the board can't deflect this time. For the first time since I moved in, the HOA board didn't look composed. They didn't look smug. They looked ... cornered. Janet, HOA president, shifted uncomfortably as the questions kept coming. Carl, the same board member who once joked about Max reciting the rules, looked like he wanted to disappear. They tried to speak, tried to pivot the conversation, but the crowd wasn't buying it. People interrupted, challenged their claims. One resident even read directly from the bylaws and asked why certain rules only seemed to apply selectively. The board had no real answers, just boilerplate responses, deflection, defensiveness. But this time, no one was falling for it. The turning point, when fear lost its power that night. Something irreversible happened. The neighborhood, once divided by fear and silence, found its voice. We weren't just neighbors anymore. We were allies, tired of the intimidation, the inconsistencies, the petty fines used as weapons, and the board knew it, because when power relies on control, the greatest threat is unity. What came next? A full-scale revolt in motion after that meeting. Changes started snowballing. Petition to review and revise the HOA's enforcement. Policy gained over 200 signatures in 2 days. Requests for transparency in board spending were formally submitted. Multiple board members were pressured to resign, including Carl. Residents formed a watchdog committee to review all HOA violations and enforce accountability. Even a few ex-board members came forward admitting that things had gotten out of hand. As for Janet, Let's just say her grip on the presidency was slipping fast. One dog, one bark, one viral video, and a community that finally fought back. Max had no idea what he started. He was still just a happy dog, wagging his tail, barking when I said HOA time. But what began as a personal annoyance, a petty fine over a so-called noisy dog, had snowballed into a neighborhood uprising, and it wasn't about barking anymore. It was about being heard. Legal showdown and the birth of real neighborhood justice. By now, the HOA probably thought things would quiet down. They had rescinded the fine, issued a half-hearted apology. Max was still lounging on the porch like nothing had happened, the unofficial mascot of neighborhood resistance.
But I wasn't finished.
Because this wasn't just about clearing my dog's name, it was about fixing the broken system that allowed this nonsense to happen in the first place. From viral video to grassroots action, I wasn't the only one fed up. After that explosive community meeting, dozens of neighbors reached out, people who had their own stories, their own fines, their own wounds. So a handful of us decided to do something unprecedented in our HOA's history. We drafted a petition to amend the bylaws, but this wasn't some vague wish list. We were specific, tactical, legally airtight. We proposed a clear new clause that said, no resident shall receive a noise violation without two independently submitted resident complaints, accompanied by date and time-stamped audio or video evidence. No more anonymous hearsay, no more weaponized opinions, no more punishments handed down without due process. If they wanted to treat the community like a courtroom, then we were going to bring real rules of evidence into play. Enter the lawyer. But I didn't stop at a petition. I wanted to know, was any of what they did even legal? So I consulted with a property law attorney who specialized in HOA disputes. I brought him the rulebook. I brought the violation letter. I even showed him the infamous video of Max barking to the bylaws. He didn't even finish reading before shaking his head. Their noise policy is far too vague, he said. In this state, subjective interpretation of excessive noise without proof doesn't hold up in court. They'd lose if this went to arbitration. That was all I needed to hear. I drafted a formal letter, respectful but firm, and delivered it directly to the HOA board. In it, I formally contested the original fine under both community and state guidelines, cited legal precedents showing their current policy violated homeowner rights, included a warning if they continued to operate outside lawful standards. Further legal action would follow, no threats, just facts. And a very clear message, we are not afraid of you anymore. The HOA blinks first. I expected pushback. A meeting, maybe a delayed response. Instead, I got results immediately. The board rescinded the fine again, officially in writing. They issued a public apology, read aloud at the next board meeting. Granted, it was the kind of apology you give when you're gritting your teeth through it, but still, it was on record. But the best part? They didn't just back down. They updated the official rulebook. Right there in black and white. Our petition language, almost verbatim, now existed as binding policy. What changed, and why it mattered? Here's what that single clause did. Made it impossible for board members to fine someone based on personal dislike or hearsay. Protected pet owners, parents, musicians, and everyday families from subjective noise complaints, ensured transparency and documentation. No more secret complaints or off the books warnings. Set a legal precedent that future boards would have to follow. It was no longer just a win for Max. It was a win for every resident, whoever felt powerless in their own home. From victim to architect of change. 6 months earlier, I was just another homeowner trying to keep my lawn green and my dog out of trouble. Now, I'd become the unlikely face of neighborhood reform. Not because I yelled, not because I broke rules, but because I fought fire with facts, and I turned mockery into movement. The HOA board, once untouchable, was now accountable. Bark. What started with a fine ended with a revolution. They fined my dog for barking. So I taught him to sing. I made a video. I rallied a neighborhood. I rewrote the rules. And in the end, I learned something powerful. You don't need to burn the house down to fix it. Sometimes, you just need to bark loud enough that everyone else finally hears what's been broken all along. And if you do it right with proof, with people, and with purpose, even the most stubborn HOA will have no choice but to listen. Barbecue and justice. How one dog united a divided neighborhood. What do you do after your dog outsmarts an entire HOA board? You throw a party, of course, but not just any party. This wasn't about petty victory laps or rubbing salt in old wounds. This was about celebrating what really mattered. Community over control, laughter over fear, and a four-legged hero named Max through the first annual Dog Appreciation BBQ. Right at the heart of the community park, the HOA had once tried to regulate down to the blade of grass. Planning the barbecue from protest to picnic hit started with a flyer, taped 2 mailboxes and slipped under doors. A simple message: come celebrate good dogs, great neighbors, and the return of common sense. Grills fire up at 3 p.m. Bring your pets, bring your stories, bring your appetite. I reserved the park pavilion using the HOA's own online form. Same form they once used to approve decorative lawn items and patio furniture types. The irony? Beautiful. We brought lawn chairs, folding tables, and enough burgers to feed a crowd. Some neighbors brought chips. Others brought pet treats. One guy even showed up with a custom cake shaped like a barking dog, complete with little fondant bylaws. Max the legend in costume in command. When Max arrived, the whole park turned to cheer. He trotted in proudly, wearing a service-style vest. Attached to the side was a laminated sign that read, "Ask me about Section 12.42. I can sing it for you." People laughed, clapped, and lined up to take photos with him like he was a celebrity, which, at this point, he practically was. Kids ran up and hugged him. Adults who once avoided eye contact at board meetings came over to shake my hand, say, "You really changed things around here. Thank you." Max basked in it all, tail wagging like a flag of freedom. Pets, people, and a new kind of neighborhood dogs of all sizes came. Golden retrievers, mutts, schnauzers, pugs, and boaties. One cat even showed up in a stroller, riding like royalty. People mingled for the first time in months. Neighbors, who hadn't spoken in years, were swapping stories over grilled hot dogs and lemonade. One woman shared how she'd been afraid to speak up after getting fined for planting unapproved flowers. A man joked that he was next. He'd been playing jazz too loud on Saturdays. Another confessed she once cried over a violation letter about her non-neutral mailbox paint. We laughed, cried, and ate together, not just as residents, but as a real community again, the moment that brought it full circle. At one point, someone grabbed a portable speaker and played a clip from the original viral video, the one where Max barked in rhythm to the HOA rulebook. The park quieted. Everyone turned to look. And right on cue, as the robotic voice recited, Section 12.4.2, all excessive noise, including but not limited to barking, Max let out his signature howl, a long, proud, operatic bark that echoed through the trees, and triggered a wave of cheers from the crowd. It was magic. It was justice. It was healing. This was more than a fine. It was a fault line. This wasn't just about a $250 ticket. This wasn't just about a petty president or a faulty rulebook. This was about years of silent resentment finally being acknowledged, about neighbors reclaiming their voices. About transforming fear into laughter and laughter into unity. For the first time, it felt like the neighborhood belonged to the people again. Not a boardroom, not a handbook, not an HOA title printed on embossed paper. Final thoughts. From rebellion to rebuilding. Max may never understand the storm he helped kick off, or the bureaucratic empire he helped dent with a single bark. But that day at the park, he knew he was loved. He knew he was safe. He knew this place, this lawn, this group of strangers turned friends, was home. And as the sun dipped low, and the coals turned to embers, I looked around and realized something. We didn't just win a fight, we reclaimed a community, all thanks to a dog. A bark, and the courage to say, "This isn't right." The final bark. From fines to fame, Max still owns the mic. So, what happened to Max after all this? Did he retire into quiet obscurity, curl up on the porch, and forget his rise to HOA-defying glory? Not even close. The timing is still impeccable even now. Weeks later, Max hasn't lost his edge. He may not have a law degree, but the dog's sense of comic timing is sharper than ever. All I have to do is utter 3 little letters, the infamous acronym that once haunted our mailbox, H, and like a true performer who knows exactly when his audience needs him, Max perks up. Head tilts. Ears twitch. Then, from deep within his chest, he lets loose a sound that has become legend on our block. A single, dramatic, glorious howl. It's not a bark. It's not a whimper. It's a baritone protest aria, a soulful declaration that says, "I remember, and I'm not done yet." From neighborhood nuisance to local icon, Max used to be that dog, the one who triggered a fine. Now, he's the neighborhood jester, town crier, and resistance mascot all rolled into one. Neighbors don't complain anymore. They wait for it. Some even try to bait him into it during walks. "Hey Max, who runs the HOA?" One head tilt later, cue the howl and cue the laughter. Kids imitate him, adults cheer him on, and every single person who remembers this story knows. This isn't just a dog howling. It's a symbol, a reminder, a melodic, 4-legged "I told you so." They asked for silence. They got symphony. The irony isn't lost on anyone. The HOA wanted control. They wanted compliance. They wanted silence. Instead, they got the most musically inclined protest in community history. What started as a fine turned into a movement. What began with a bark ended in reform, and what they hoped would be a warning became an anthem. One last howl for the road. Every time I hear Max let it rip at the mention of HOA, I can't help but smile. Because no matter how strict the rules, no matter how many pages the bylaws stretch across, no matter how hard they tried to silence one dog, they never expected him to sing the rules back louder than they were written. And to this day, long after the video went viral, the fine was erased, and the bylaws rewritten, Max still howls on cue. Not out of rebellion, not out of noise, but out of rhythm. Revenge. And perfectly timed joy. So next time someone asks me how I dealt with a petty HOA fine, I just point to Max and say, I didn't have to fight them alone. I had a baritone.